Thank you so much, and welcome once again. I'm very happy to have such a great panel of speakers in today's webinar, and I'm so happy to see so many of you joining because it's really a very timely and important topic. UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science is the first international open science framework, and it's really important to discuss together how open access publishers could align with the recommendations. And we'll hear four short talks, and then we'll have a discussion. And to support open access publishers willing to align with the UNESCO recommendation on open science, we drafted guidelines and checklist for open access publishers. And let me drop a link in the chat. And that's a document that is still a draft, and it might change even today this webinar. And we also want to release it as an open document to everyone after the webinar. So if you have any comments or suggestions on the structure, please add your comments to the document that I shared. And without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, who is Siewicz, and she's a program specialist for science policy, the natural sciences sector of UNESCO. And I think many of you know Anna because she tirelessly works to strengthen the science policy interface and promote science, technology, and innovation in implementing the UN 2030 agenda for sustainable development and sustainable development goals. And she currently focuses on the implementation of UNESCO recommendation on open science. So over to you, Anna. And thanks a lot to sponsors who are supporting this webinar series.
Thank you very much, Iryna, and thank you to the to ASPA, to all the organizers. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy that we are having this conversation. I like the name, From Policy to Action. I'm here to tell you a little bit about the policy side, and then we'll be very happy to hear from your side a little bit more about what the open access publishing community can do to support the implementation of our UNESCO recommendation. So I'll share my screen, and hopefully it's gonna work. Is it okay? Can you all see it well? Yeah? Good. So just to tell you a little bit more about the UNESCO recommendation of open science. To start with, maybe some of you are not familiar with kind of the terminology of recommendation. And the UNESCO recommendations are actually legal instruments in which the General Conference, which is the supreme body of UNESCO, where all the 193 member states sit, they formulate principles and norms to regulate at the international level a specific issue, and then actually ask the member states to take whatever legislative steps to actually implement this this recommendation. So even if it's not a convention, so it's not necessarily legally binding, it is still a legal instrument that is supposed to influence the legislative setup in different countries that have adopted the recommendation. The reason why UNESCO had decided to start this process of having a recommendation on open science is that we've seen really throughout the past, let's say, 10 years, this movement of open science picking up in different parts of the world at different levels from different communities. And everybody started to agree that actually there is a need for an international policy and action framework, a need for a common definition of what open science is, what are the values and principles, and what are the key actions that need to be taken to make sure that open science truly does meet its potential. One of the key issues within UNESCO at the time in 2019, when the member states decided that we should have this recommendation, was that they were really keen to make sure that open science is as equitable as possible, and that it is absolutely clear that open science has to be for everybody and has to benefit everybody, whether from north, from the south, whether from one discipline or another. The idea really is to create this international framework to guide the further implementation of open science. So in 2019, our General Conference, 193 member states, asked UNESCO to develop this international regulatory or standard setting instrument, which is the UNESCO Recommendation of Open Science. And in a way, we are strangely lucky that this whole process of development of the recommendation, which was very inclusive and consultative, it took place basically during the 2 years that we were all challenged with the COVID pandemics. The good thing about that was that the pandemic really did show how important it is to have timely and free access to scientific data, publications, and information, how important it is to have scientific collaborations and sharing of information at all levels, and how important it is to have a good functioning science policy society dialogue. So the importance of open science was made very visible by this COVID-19 pandemic. What has also been made very visible is that in general, we do have around 70% of all scientific publications locked behind paywalls. And for the COVID-19 publications, it kind of flipped over. And we do see some 85% of COVID-19 related publications which are open access. So the point with this is to say, opening access to publications, but also furthermore, opening science is something that is possible if there is willingness and if the different actors come together to actually make it happen. So in these 2 years of development of the recommendation, what was very important for us at UNESCO was to be as inclusive as possible, get the views from different regions of the world, from different actors. So we really put a lot of time and energy making sure that everybody was able to provide their inputs into this consultative process and into the text of the recommendation. And I'm sure that many of you who are present in the in this webinar today actually did provide inputs into the recommendation, and hopefully you can find bits and pieces of your text also somewhere in the recommendation. Another important kind of milestone in the development of the recommendation was that in May last year, the member states, over 100 member states, actually negotiated the text of the recommendation. They came together, it was an online meeting, and as I said, over 100 representatives of member states, their legal and technical experts, came together and negotiated the draft text of the recommendation. We also had observers, and for the first time, we had an excellent interaction between experts and legal and technical experts and observers, because they were able really to exchange on both the technicalities, but also some of the more political implications of the recommendation. And then in November this year, again, the General Conference met again, and they actually adopted the final text of the recommendation. As I said, what is important for the text of the recommendation, and I think also for this discussion, is that the recommendation gives a broad definition of open science. So of course, open access is part of open science, and I'll talk about that as well, but it is part of a bigger picture. So open science is defined as an ensemble of different movements and practices that increase scientific collaboration and sharing of information for the benefits of science and society, that makes multilingual scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for everyone, and that also opens the process of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. So it's opening science for scientists, but it's also opening science to a broader community as well, with this notion really of equity, equality, and diversity. As I said, the recommendation really gives a broad overview of what open science is and what the different elements are. And there has been a lot of negotiations as to how do we define all of these different elements. So there is the open scientific knowledge, open science infrastructures, open engagement of societal actors, and open dialogue with other knowledge systems. So these are the key pillars, let's say, of open science. And within the open scientific knowledge, we have open access to scientific publication, open research data, open educational resources, open source software and source code, and open hardware. And the recommendation really does give a little kind of definition of all of these terms so that everybody reading it and everybody trying to implementing it knows exactly what they are talking about. So if we look a little bit into the open access side of things in the recommendation, we see that the recommendation kind of defines the scope of the scientific publications, peer-reviewed journals, articles, books, research reports, conference papers. It also talks about the types of platforms and repositories where these scientific publications should be posted and how they should be disseminated. And it also mentions the fact that it goes beyond just the publication. So we're also talking about the data, software, source code, and other elements that also need to be accompanying the publications and articles themselves. I'm not going to go and read through all of this because, as I said, it really is all in the recommendation, but I thought it was important just to make some of these key aspects known to everybody in the webinar. And of course, it touches upon what open access is, saying that a paywall method of publication where immediate access to scientific publication is only granted in exchange for payment is not aligned with the present recommendation. It then also goes into the fact that, as I was saying before, the scientific knowledge needs to be available in the public domain under copyright and license under an open license that allows access, reuse, repurpose, adaptation, etc. And then the distribution under specific conditions, and again to all the different actors independently of their nationality, location, race, discipline, career stage, language, etc. So again, trying at every moment in the development of the recommendation or in the text of the recommendation to bring back these notions of accessibility and also the notions of equity. The recommendation also provides different areas of action and different actions. They are stated. There's a variety of different actions that are listed or stated under these different priority action areas. And the priority action areas are promoting a common understanding of open science, developing and enabling policy environment, fostering a culture of open science, investing in human resources and also in infrastructures and services, promoting cooperation at all levels, and innovative approaches for open science. And we again find open access under these different priority actions with specific actions dealing with encouraging bibliodiversity, encouraging multilingualism, adopting policies that require and reward open access to scientific knowledge, ensuring diversity, open, transparent, and equitable access and support for non-commercial publishing models, collaborative publishing models with no APCs, encouraging community-driven collaboration and other innovative models, for example, preprint, and I'm sure we will hear about that as well, promoting open peer review, sharing of negative scientific results, incorporating citizen science, other forms of participatory science. And then I think what is important is that already in the text of the recommendation, it is clear that there are certain challenges that need to be addressed while one is implementing open science practices. And it is really preventing and mitigating predatory behaviors, data migration, exploitation and privatization of research data, possible increased costs for scientists and high article processing charges. Most of these are unintended consequences of open science practices. It's something that that kind of happened, but now we realize that these really are some of the issues that need to be addressed, particularly if our goal is to kind of bridge the knowledge divide and between the developed and developing countries, between scientists coming from developed and developing countries, and if our ultimate goal in the end is really this human right to science and also equity in science, in the production of science and also in the uptake of science. So one other thing that I think is key in the recommendation, and when it comes to kind of aligning some of the actions from different actors, is really to make sure that whatever activity or action actors are taking, that they align with these values and principles, which are very, very nicely defined in the recommendation. So in terms of values, it's quality, integrity, collective benefit, equity and fairness, diversity and inclusiveness, and then a series of principles also that really need to be taken into account for every single open science initiative, practice, action that is taken.
So 1 more minute.
Perfect, and this is my last slide. So as I said, and even the recommendation states it clearly, there is a broad range of actors that need to be put, and stakeholders that have to come together to make sure that open science functions correctly in a way. Of course, publishers, open access publishers in general are very important actors, but there are also many others. And for the implementation also of the recommendation, we as UNESCO really will rely on this open science community to help countries and the different actors in the different countries implement the recommendation. I'll take the opportunity here to invite everybody to this online meeting that we are organizing at the end of the month, where we want to present our implementation strategy for the recommendation. We really want to reach out to all the different partners, open up the process of implementation again, have it as consultative as possible and getting all the different actors together. And we also want to launch, we will launch this global call for best practices of open science, which we think are going to be critical moving forward. Because right now, whenever we go to different countries, the question is no longer whether or not they should do open science or pursue open science. The question is really, how do we do it? And who has done something that we can learn from? So this is really what we need right now, and why this meeting is also important, is to see what are the good practices out there, what are the things that have already been done, what are the guidelines the different communities can give to their other peers to ensure that the principles and values of this recommendation are followed and the recommendation is implemented in the right way. So this will be all from me for the moment, and then I'll be happy to respond to any questions later in the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Anna. And if you have any questions to Anna, colleagues, please drop them in the Q&A, and I put once again a link in the chat to draft guidelines documents based on UNESCO recommendation on open science and structure basically mirrors what Anna presented. It includes values and principles, and then checklists on the areas of actions. And we're seeking your feedback on the draft document. So please add any comments, suggestions that you have. And now we'll move on to some implementation examples, and we'll hear 3 talks. And let me invite Roheena Anand, who is an executive director for global publisher development at Plos. And Roheena is responsible for Plos' global expansion strategy, and she brings her over 20 years experience from Plos' STM publishing industry, not least her previous role as the head of open access journals at the Royal Society of Chemistry. So now look forward to you, Roheena, and looking forward to hear what Plos thinks about implementing
Thank you, Iryna. Really delighted to be with you here today. I'm just going to get the technical part over first and try and share my screen. No, that's not. Can you see slides?
Yes.
Great. Okay, and just slides, is that right? Okay, so as I was saying, really delighted to be with you here today and to have the chance to tell you how we feel Plos is embodying the values and the principles of open science as outlined by Anna just now in the UNESCO recommendation. In case any of you are not aware of Plos, we're a not-for-profit open access publisher empowering researchers to accelerate progress in science and medicine by leading a transformation in research communication. We actively strive for openness and transparency throughout the whole research communication process because of the benefits that they bring to knowledge dissemination, to its utility and its reproducibility. And therefore we are purposefully open by design. Open science principles, whether philosophical or practical, are embedded within everything we do, whether our editorial policy, our business models, or how we design our journals. In the time I have, I'm only going to manage a high-level overview of all our open science practices at Plos, but I would say that there is a wealth of information available on our website if you're interested in finding out more details about what we do, or of course, please do reach out directly. So, I think there's lots for publishers to unpick in the recommendation, and I've started with the definition that UNESCO put together and all the contributors put together. And I know that there are going to be guidelines for webinar attendees of the relevant parts of this, but I thought I'd pick out a few key areas that I thought were useful from my point of view, from a publisher perspective. And the first one for me is the concept of inclusiveness, in that it's not only part of open science, but absolutely core and intrinsic to its principles. As Anna said, it's an ensemble or a combination of various movements and practices, and together, all of these contribute to making knowledge more accessible, more available, and more reproducible. Ultimately, so that that knowledge can have the tangible desired benefit it should for further knowledge creation and for the benefit of society and humanity. When it's done right, open science facilitates and enables global collaboration and participation. And as Anna was saying, it focuses on the processes of scientific knowledge creation, its evaluation and communication. So not just one output of that research. And lastly, it applies to all disciplines, not just STEM ones. And so we're talking about science as an organized system of criticism rather than a specific discipline. So access to publications, and in particular to published articles, is really only just the beginning. And the principle we follow at Plos is that open is about more than just being able to read an article. It's about providing the right context to understand it, providing the resources to replicate it, and the tools to collaborate and make science better. And it's also about equitable participation, as we were saying, in knowledge creation and sharing. As publishers, open science really allows us and encourages us to rethink how we share and communicate research, and to make that move from the constraints of the physical format and take advantage of the opportunities that are provided and offered by the digital world. Practically, we can ensure availability and usability of scholarly publications, including data, methods, protocols, and code, etc., increasing transparency and making those outputs available to everyone to use and build upon. Philosophically, we recognise that research is a fundamentally collaborative endeavour with open inquiry at its core, and we look to place this and equitable participation at the heart of the research enterprise. So as this indicates, in transitioning to open science, we're no longer talking about an article, or at least not only an article to share research findings. Now a multiplicity of findings can be shared to give a fuller picture of that research and to recognise how that research happens. So that might involve, for example, a registered report, which is a publication outlining the planned research, followed by a preprint or versions of preprints to share early versions of the work. Then a peer-reviewed article, but importantly alongside that, the peer review materials, ideally the reviews, plus the editor comments, the underlying data, the methods or the protocols of the study design, as well as sharing code or materials that are necessary for the research to be carried out. And not forgetting, of course, that there may be iterations subsequently to correct errors and to improve and add to results as the work is continued to be built upon. So that one article becomes a digital knowledge stack rather than one single output. And what does that mean for how we publish? Well, it moves us from publishing as an event that happens when an article appears to become more of a process that better mirrors how the research is carried out and then communicated. So one example of how we've applied this is with our journal Plos Biology. It's a selective journal, and that selectivity, it's valued by the community, but has also potentially contributed to a reproducibility crisis in biology and biomedicine. And that's because of a culture where research showing what are perceived to be exciting results is maybe valued more over studies confirming results. So our aim has been to really redefine what selectivity means there. And instead of just focusing on those results, to focus on the importance of the research question and the rigor of the research. Because if that research question is worthy of funding or resourcing, then the outcome should be worthy of sharing. So the journal includes pre-registered research, data, but also discovery reports, which share the discovery phase of research, as well as linked update articles, which share confirmatory or contradictory findings, either by the original group or another group. So therefore, within that process, one single version of record or final published article is only really one part of the story. As well as evolving our journals to better reflect that research process, we design them with open science principles, both philosophical and practical, at their core. Researchers have always driven our mission forward, and in order to have a meaningful impact with those journals, we need to include the broadest range of their voices globally. So our new journals create new and diverse communities of practice and ensure that they're at the forefront of shaping how we address the most pressing health and environmental issues that are facing our society. So the titles, we try to do that in these titles by ensuring diversity and equity of representation at all levels. Editors, editorial boards, reviewers, authors, and we actively seek out research from underrepresented communities. As well as moving beyond a single article or a single research output, we also need to move, we feel, beyond the APC, which is a model that's focused on one research output. I just talked about how in Plos Biology, we're trying to redefine selectivity, but we're doing this not only in our editorial criteria, but also in our business models. We feel that an APC model is not the appropriate business model for selective journals, and that's why we developed our community action publishing model, really to show that selectivity is possible without high APCs and to move beyond a model that's just built on articles. Our global equity model similarly doesn't work on the basis of a per article or per unit payment to access a publishing service, and moreover reflects countries' financial situations by relating to the World Bank lending criteria. And we'll continue to develop our models with our stakeholder partners there, including libraries, consortia and funders, so that we can move to a system of accountability that isn't just based on counting articles. Another example of the inclusiveness at the core of our journals is our recent inclusion in global research editorial policy. And we developed this to address the issue of parachute research, which can also be known as helicopter or neo-colonial science. And that's when researchers travel to under-resourced communities, conduct their research and leave, but often with little understanding or involvement of the communities they've studied, and perhaps with few direct benefits to local participants. So we developed a questionnaire with members of our editorial community, and the aim was to outline ethical, cultural, and scientific considerations that are specific to inclusivity in global research. And the questionnaire asks, for example, the reasons why, if there are no local authors included on the authorship list. So then we collate all this information and provide it to the editors and the reviewers looking to review the articles during the peer review process, to help them assess whether the research meets the journal's standards for the ethics of experimentation and research integrity. As well as designing our journals to align with open science philosophical principles, we've embedded and integrated open science practice within them. And so to do this, we defined 14 open science features that would be called the portfolio. They span the whole publishing process, as shown by the timeline on the slide, and embody the principles shown, those of accessibility, diversity, immediacy, and so on. And these are the 14 key open science features that are part of publishing within the portfolio. I really realise this is quite a busy slide, but it's really to just give you an indication of the range of those features. And as you can see, the colour coding aims to align with that one shown on the timeline on the previous slide, showing which part of the research cycle each feature corresponds to. And underneath, in very, very small writing, the principles that each supports. And these practices include some which researchers will be more familiar with, such as preprints, open licenses, etc., but also those which may be less familiar, such as sharing code. But in all those practices and implementing them, we look to really lead in encouraging open science practice. But to do so, we try to work closely with our diverse communities to assure that adoption can be as streamlined and as painless as possible.
Perhaps 1 more minute.
Oh, okay. We publish as much information as possible, as well as we can, about the adoption and engagement with our open science features, because for us, it's not just about applying those features, it's about showing the outcomes and impact of that, and thereby to hopefully encourage more engagement. So there are examples of a number of pieces of research on our website. As I was saying, our journals are very much designed to be communities of open research practice, but they're only one of the ways we engage with the community around open science. Scientists for Open Science was a nice example of this, where we developed a week-long virtual programme, and that brought together researchers and stakeholders from around the globe to share their perspectives, giving them an opportunity to sign up to a commitment for open science, signifying their commitment to advance trust and inclusion in research communication. So I'm going to finish up here with the final slide showing the values and principles from the recommendation. But I would say at Plos, we've always worked to raise the bar for openness, and we've intentionally moved from open access to open science to continue to try and define new routes to equitable participation, very much in line with these values and principles. We're experimenters, but we're also trying to be better listeners, and because we know that a rigid one-size-fits-all approach to open science is not going to foster the equitable participation we want to see from all communities. So we're continuing to work on this, and we're continuing to grow to try and develop more partnerships with local communities around the globe. And so we're expanding our global footprint in what we consider to be locally responsible ways to build those relationships with stakeholders in local research ecosystems, because we want to understand the specific challenges that those communities face, and that our policies might represent for new communities. Only that way, by listening to them, by learning from them, and by working alongside them, can we co-create paths to open science and find solutions that are going to empower them in their context to practice open science. And we've been doing that recently via a partnership in Africa with the Training Centre of Communication based at the University of Nairobi. And so we should have some nice examples, nice further examples to share with you soon around that partnership.
Thank you so much. There is one clarification question for you in the Q&A. Perhaps you can answer that already, and please, colleagues, keep adding your questions and we'll address them after 2 more talks. And now I'm very happy to invite Krzysztof Siewicz, who will bring us the university perspective to this discussion. And Krzysztof is a doctor of law, a mediator and legal counsel. And he specializes in legal issues concerning information processes. But he's here with us today in his capacity as coordinator of the Library of Science, which is the largest open access scientific collection in Poland. And Krzysztof is from ICM in the University of Warsaw. Over to you, Krzysztof. How does it look from an Eastern European perspective and public institution perspective?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'd like to tell you about our experiences and competences that we gathered in ICM, hoping that that might be useful in implementing open science, and especially following the UNESCO recommendation. I'm a lawyer by education, but now I mostly I focus on leading the team and coordinating the Biblioteka Nauki, which in Polish is Library of Science. It's a Polish nationwide platform for open science journals, open access journals, and also open access books. Although we collect some number of journals from abroad, and we also plan for some regional development. But the Library of Science is not the only thing that we do at our team. I may say that we are an infrastructure and competence center for open science. We run, apart from Biblioteka Nauki, we run other repositories and platforms that allow researchers or publishers to store and make available their not only publications but also research data. We also provide trainings and seminars for various actors interested in implementing open access and open science in their activities. We publish analysis and reports. We even several times took part in government policy making as experts and advisors. But today I'd like to go a bit more detail into our library, our open access library. It's well, statistically, you can see, I think, most important numbers on this slide. We've gathered a few 100,000 articles from over 1,500 journals, which we cooperate under licensing contracts. With each publishers, we enter into a cooperation agreement, which gives us license to make available their publications, which means that we enter at the end of the whole publication process. When journal issue is published, then it is sent to us, either imported automatically using some standard protocols or entered on our platform together with accompanying metadata. Since 2020, we've started integrating scientific books on the same platform. Before that, we operated a separate site where we gathered books, mostly out of print scientific books, that we collected, contacting directly authors and in some occasions publishers. And now we are cooperating with an increasing number of publishers that want to make their books available on the same platform. thus expanding this this portfolio. We've took we took care to integrate open licensing in the whole process. It might be a bit hard for archival data, but for the current data, we are quite diligent in registering information about exact license where under which each article or book is available, and we also propagate this information through API, so that you can find this information not just in PDF, in article text, but also in metadata, and that makes it more capable of being automatically processed and analyzed. Most of the journals that we cooperate with operate in the Diamond open access approach. And this, together with the fact that we are publicly funded, allows us to offer the whole service free of charge to anyone interested. So our users can access library and access full text of publications just having an internet connection and a web browser. They don't have to log in, they don't have to pay any fees, and we also don't collect any fees, any money from publishers, and majority of the publishers don't collect any charges from authors, as they are publicly funded from the state budget or from other grants on scientific publishing. We also joined forces with domain and indexing databases, which are instrumental in safeguarding quality of metadata. But generally, we are also open to cooperation with publishers directly, because each publisher is given an individual account on our site, which allows to enter metadata and full text by them by hand by themselves, or it allows to set up automatic imports from, for example, OJS sites of individual journals, or it can be, all the metadata can be intermediated by indexing databases that collect and curate metadata. And of course, this cooperation is non-exclusive. We don't expect publishers to forego their individual sites, or to or we don't expect them not to seek other places where they can be findable. We've as a supercomputing center, we pay a lot of attention to technical details, because if the publications and metadata are presented online according to accepted standards, they are better visible on the internet. They can be better imported to other sites, which is important because it allows to save efforts in manually having to enter metadata again and again in different sites, and it can also help a lot in performing any type of automated analysis, evaluation, and in next step to undertake informed policy decisions based on data that can be found on our site, or additional analysis that can be made with this data. very briefly, I just want to show you a few screen shots from the sites from the site, which it has an internal search engine. It can be also accessed through other external search engines, because they can easily index our the content of our publications. We've designed additional possibility for journals to feature themselves, not just the content of their publications, because each of the journals can have a kind of separate home page on our site, which allows to present most important information, not only for the readers, but also for authors and reviewers, some statistical information about journal indexation and indicators, which helps authors to identify the quality of the journal and its possible impact. There are some minor, but I think very useful tools available, like citation generator, which helps authors to reuse the publications that are available on our site. And there are also some tools that help a journal to enter the data should there be a need to enter data by hand. So, for example, this is a tool that allows to copy a text from PDF and then select which part of the text should go to which field of the metadata form. We have also a tool for automatic extraction of metadata, which then fills in the forms with the data found automatically in the PDF, thus saving the work that had to be done for entering the data by hand. Well, few last words about our additional activities. So we operate the portal, but we don't leave our users by themselves. We organize recurring webinars, trainings, seminars on open access and various aspects of transferring into open access. For example, how to properly apply open access licensing, how to organize automatic transfer of journal metadata. Publishers can come to our events and learn from our experience. We also present. You can find also on our webpage various publications in which we present our analysis of some, I think, important trends in open science. I think the two most recent ones are about transformative agreements and also on the status of the process of opening research data in Poland. And since we don't have, I think, more time, I would like to stop here, but I'm open to any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Krzysztof. And there is already one question for you in the chat. So not in the chat, in the Q&A. To answer it, and we'll address other questions after Raoul's talk. And I'm very happy to invite Raoul Kamadjeu to speak and bring us the perspective of an African publisher. Raoul is a physician and a co-founder of Pan-African Medical Journal. He got his doctorate in medicine in Cameroon, his MPH in Belgium, and he's a doctoral candidate in epidemiology at the City University of New York School of Public Health. And he also works for UNICEF as a public health emergency specialist. So over to you, Raoul, and how do you see the implementation of UNESCO Open Science Recommendation in your context.
Thank you, Iryna. I hope you can hear me all.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Slides.
All right. You can see the slides.
Yes.
Okay, let's rock and roll. The Pan-African Medical Journal is an open access publisher, and we've been in the business of open access publishing for the past 10 years, and we can see that we actually have an ecosystem of product that we offer to our customers, including 3 journals, and we are involved in research grants, capacity building activities, conference services, and of course, publishing services. Who are the stakeholders of open science in the African context? We put, first the researchers, and we'll explain why in a minute. And following the researchers, we have the institutions, the publishers / the journals. And after that, we have the funders of research, civil society organizations, citizens, and of course, governments. And in Africa, I would like to say that open access is the best known vehicle of open science implementation. I saw a question in the chat about the difference between open access and open science, if these words are used interchangeably. In our context, usually when you talk open science, people tend to understand open access because that's the part they know the most. In one of our annual PMG poll, we checked with the authors the reasons why they publish in the PMJ. And most of the authors, in fact, 100% say that it's because it's open access. Another 100% say because it's indexed on PubMed and Scopus. And 95% mention affordable, article public APC, because they can't afford higher APC. And when we ask our authors in the same poll, are you willing to deposit your data in open data repository? 79% say no, they can't, they don't want to, they're not ready to deposit their data in the PMJ-enabled open access data repository or to any repository, by the way. And we will understand why in the subsequent slides. In the African context, what we can say is that African authors and academic or researchers or institutions, they are very, very well aware of open access because Africa is a major beneficiary of open access. But what we think at the PMJ is that Africa should also be a major contributor to open access. And if you look at a website or at a repository as the African open access journal repository, like African Journal Online, you will see a kind of increase in the number of journals that are open access on the African continent. But if you look more carefully, you will realize that challenges actually persist. A lot of journals are afflicted by a syndrome that we call, one volume, one series or something like that. I forgot the name. Just to say that some African open access journals are created, but they don't persist beyond a certain period. They are not sustainable. So credible open access journals remain rare in our context simply because open access is expensive. And this is something that we have not discussed a lot. Who paid for open access? In the PMJ, we have approximately 15 full-time staff. And when you add to that the operational costs, some elements of quality of open access journal actually, increase the cost. So if you're a serious journal these days, if you're open access, you want to have a cross-ref, you want to have a DOI, you want to add ORCID, you want to be on Poblon, you want to be archived somewhere. Multilingualism, we've received a lot of requests from our authors to incorporate Portuguese in our publications, but we just can't because it's extremely expensive. We already have English and French, but we're happy to add, Portuguese or Swahili, but they are just, too expensive. And we are in the context where we are kind of forced to keep the APC affordable. And we have the same APC for the past 10 years. And we just can't improve that, because increase on the APC, because it's already at the limit where authors can actually afford. And the funding models for open access journals in Africa are quite limited. And institutions don't fund, government don't fund, and the private sector will come back to that. And one of the other specificity of Africa is that most submissions to the PMJ are author-funded, not government-funded, not institution-funded, not externally funded. So authors actually fund their own research. And the consequence is that they tend to research what can be searched, what they can search, not what should be researched. And this kind of dictates the attitude of authors towards open access and open research. And when you ask an author who put his personal money, who put the family money into research, and you ask him to share the data, it's like, no, hell no. I have suffered so much to collect those data. I'm not happy to share them without absolutely no benefit. So this is some of the insight that we get from our authors. And since the government is not a significant funder of research in most places, the government, leverage on open science policies is kind of limited. And you have a lot of leverage when you also put in money. You can tell institutions what they do, what to do around open science when you actually fund them. When you fund them, they listen. And we have seen that happening somewhere else. Although we think the government can, play a significant role on, opening government data. So we think that the external funders of research done in Africa may have an even bigger role to play in stimulating open science or open access in Africa. So how do we see the future of open access in this context? Something that has happened recently, I remember when I was a young medical student, we couldn't publish, of course, our manuscripts in the big journal because we were told that this research is too provincial to be published in an international journal. But this extension between local and international audience no longer exists. Manuscripts that were rejected in the PMJ, in a study done in a remote part of Ethiopia, get published in Plos, for example. And interchangeably, you can distinguish these days a manuscript published in Plos from a manuscript published in the PMJ. And the recent development also, something that we have seen recently, is that large open access publishers, they're moving into markets that were previously neglected. We've seen local journals, in fact, local denomination of big access or big open access publishers, now showing up. And the space for the development of an open access industry in Africa is rapidly shrinking. So what we will see is that we'll have an expansion of the contents of open access journal. We will see, diversity from the origin of the articles, but we'll end up with a less diverse pool of providers of content. So this is what is happening. And to conclude here, we call for expanding the call to open access, and funders can play a big role. So, for example, funders can say, research done in Africa should preferably be published in an African journal, or a research done in another part of the world should preferably be published in a journal from that part of the world. And of course, there are regional organizations, regional research organizations that they have a big role to play. There are opportunity to strengthen local, regional linkages. There are opportunity for partnership. The goal here is really to promote diversity in open access content delivery landscape. If not, we'll end up with a few mega open access publishers, publishing 90% of all the open access material that's out there. That was the end of my presentation. Thank you, and looking forward to questions. Over.
Thank you so much, Raoul. It's been very useful. So now we're in a panel discussion mode, and just to remind everyone that our goal is to come up with some kind of checklist that would help publishers implement UNESCO Recommendation Open Science, and drop in once again a link to a Google Doc, which is draft checklist. So please add your comments and suggestions, and we'll focus on the questions which are related to that. And then we'll email all remaining questions to speakers, and we'll share the answers with you. And I would like to start with a question about encouraged and required open science practices. That's a question to Roheena from Alexandra. So I'll read it once again. Great talk. Some of your open science practices are encouraged publication of reused names, code methods, but others are required. How do you determine which you land on? And perhaps that's a question to everyone. Like, how do you decide what is it recommended or required open science practices in your journals? And what perhaps is a low-hanging fruit? Like, if someone would like to start, where would they rather start? Perhaps Roheena, you go first, and then if anyone else could.
I can start, yes, sure. So thank you for the question. So broadly, the ones we mandate tend to be those that are the most broadly accessible to the research we publish. For instance, data sharing, open licenses, issues around acknowledging and recognizing authorship and contributorship, so ORCID and credit, and competing interests, and those which would align with our mission and principles. Some may be more specific to certain communities and where we feel a mandate would really drive that forward. So for example, with pre-registration for clinical trials, and code sharing is mandatory for computational biology. So others therefore are more optional. It may be also because they're newer and less familiar to communities, and so they need more introduction and development, co-development with them, but they can be then facilitated and made easier if we recognize differences in community behaviors and their potential engagement with them, if that gives enough of an answer.
Thanks a lot, sir. Anyone else would like to add something? And we can take the next one, and it's about APCs, and we have a number of those questions. So one is from Henry, again to Roheena. Is Plos intention for the community action publishing model to replace all APCs eventually? How would this work for researchers at small institutions that can't afford to participate, for those who are not affiliated? And there is another question from Suni. Can Plos tell us more about potential publishing business model without APCs? Thanks. And then there is a question about APC waivers, like how fair the waivers are. So if perhaps again, Roheena, you could start, and if others could add what your views are on APCs, affordable APCs, and community publishing models.
Sure, yes. So where shall I start? Well, I mean, we'll happily come back to give a presentation about our business models, because I could spend a good few minutes talking through them actually, and there are a lot of nice details around them that would be good to share with a broader audience, I think, in how we've developed them. What I would say is that Plos are clear that we do want to move beyond the APC, because while it was useful for showing the viability of open access as a publishing model and helped us pioneer and push that forward, we know that that's had unintended consequences, because it has made it less participatory than it should be, and less equitable. And so that's why we're looking to develop these new models. But we're also open that we are piloting and trialing those, and we're seeing how they go. So we are reporting back frequently on our success and the uptake, and we're continuing to work with our stakeholders there, whether it be librarians, funders, consortia, to develop those models so they work to as broad an audience as possible. But they are trying to do different things. So community action publishing, like I referenced briefly, was a model that we developed to acknowledge that to support publishing in what we define as our selective journals, so PLOS Biology and PLOS Medicine, and acknowledging that that potentially does need a different business model to others that are potentially less selective. So community action publishing was aiming to move the administrative burden from the author to an institution. It also brought in certain novel factors like taking account of not just contributing authors to an article, but also, not just corresponding authors to an article, but also contributing authors to an article. And also acknowledge that, there is a cost, and actually we want participation to be as broad as possible and membership to be as broad as possible. So institutions, for example, that are in a research for life country can participate in membership free of charge. And that's similar for our global equity model as well, which is a model that is that supports some of our newer journals, some of our the ones that I showed earlier, PLOS Climate, PLOS Global Public Health, and PLOS Water. And again, that model is aiming to shift the burden from authors to institutions, but also take account, like I said, of countries, institutions in countries and their financial situations by actually kind of tiering related to World Bank lending criteria. So that's a really, really brief indication of how those models have been developed and the ideas of equity that we tried to make core to the principles there. Because also coming to waivers, which was mentioned, we don't think they're an ideal solution. It's putting more work onto authors, finding the relevant information. They need to be able to apply for a waiver. It is a burdensome process as well, and it's not sustainable. So this is how we're doing it. We're going to continue to try and develop models, see how these models work, and very much work with the community to see what works, what doesn't, and evolve them as we go.
Thanks a lot. Anyone would like to add? Raoul, please.
Yeah, absolutely. The article publishing charges are, is our main source of revenue, and we've been struggling with that. If it was just up to me, I would have, very happily, just got rid of APC. But unfortunately, we can't. And our statistics actually show that only 35 to 40% of the authors actually pay article processing fees. And there are very few institutions for the continent that are actually supporting authors to cover their APC. We have a few universities, few authors in South Africa that are sometimes supported by the organization. We have a few authors when they are based in Europe or in the US and they submit to the PMJ, they're supported by the organizations. But most of the time you have individual authors who really can't afford their APC. Our $180 of APC that we have has been there for the past 12 years. And we just don't know how to move forward with it. Do we increase? That would be too much. Do we decrease? The journal can survive. So that's why we are trying to kind of expand our source of revenue to other activities, to partnering with organization, regional organization, just to maybe keep the APC lowest level possible and find a way to survive without the APC. But unfortunately, there are we don't have a solution yet. So we are still a work in progress here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And there is another question from Martin, and it's a question to Roheena, but I think perhaps everyone could comment a bit on that. So it's Roheena, great to hear about all the initiatives of openness. Which of the aspects do authors find most difficult to comply with? Similarly, in which areas would support for authors make the most progress towards open science? Perhaps if everyone could comment on that from your experiences, and perhaps Roheena, you could start.
I'm happy to let others start since I've been talking actually, so please do go ahead.
Yeah, I can start here. There are definitely opportunities to do some work with institutions. We have some capacity building activities, just limited to authors but we can definitely engage an institution on the, concept of open science. What we have started with an institution, for example, is to how do they make, all the MD thesis, the master thesis, available, online or open access to all. So how do we also partner with government to start to bring out some of the open government data that are available out there? This is also something that we are exploring. But of course, the bandwidth of those working for the PMJ is kind of limited. So we have to really taking things with baby steps. But let me just give you an example. We were able to work with a regional organization on the continent to make sure that their candidate actually submit to open access journal, the African Open Access Journal, and also agree that in the future they will start depositing their data. That was something really is still a big challenge, having people deposit their data. And that's unfortunate. And something that we're also doing is to help ethics committees, to avail resources, train them on the concept of open science, on the concept of open data, because this concept, trust me, are not so widely, understood in our place. I'll stop there.
I would very much just echo what Raoul said, because I think this is what I was going to say. There's no easy answer to this, because I think it very much depends on the cultural contexts and and where people are doing science and the context they find themselves in, and their familiarity with certain open science practices very much does relate to that. So which region of the world a researcher is in, which country, it's all going to differentiate how they publish, how they do science, and how they communicate their research. And so I think there's a lot we can do around education, and a lot we need to do around education and awareness of the benefits of open science, and really try and make those benefits clear to individuals as well as showing the greater good for society.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, maybe just a couple of things, and I'm thinking about the guidelines that you have shared in the chat for the community. I think going a little bit more into details precisely about these challenges is something that is very useful, as we can see from the discussions here. And also going back a little bit to the discussion on APCs and the business model, there probably for a certain amount of time will be a period where different options just have to be put on the table, and different actors and in different parts of the world will just have to choose which option is the best for them for that particular case or in that particular. So I don't think we will soon have one super solution to solve these problems. But as Roheena said, there are different models out there, different attempts, different new practices. Let's try to kind of put them all on the table somewhere. And UNESCO, we really do want to serve as this forum where we can discuss these things and where we can bring all these practices together and then figure out, what is the best one? Why does it work better here? Why it doesn't work good over there? Without necessarily prescribing what each and every actor has to do, but just saying, okay, this is the options that you have. These are the people you can contact. And maybe this is kind of the way forward, a little bit more flexible while we learn what the best model is. Because really the APCs are now becoming a major challenge. We hear it, particularly from developing countries. At the same time, we have some models in Latin America that also work. So, just again, putting it all out there, I think it's very, very useful for the different actors. And Raoul said, rightly so, that, the governments are not the only ones who can influence open science practices. But what we've seen now with countries that are starting to develop their open science policies is that they actually bring these actors together. So already the understanding that there are different actors, that they have to work together, and that they come up with a policy where each and every actor has a role to play, that already I think it's a pretty good good start. And particularly some countries in Africa are moving in that direction. And there is more and more initiatives in Africa that are picking up now precisely to address some of the issues that you were talking about, and making sure that open science is beneficial for African scientists and for Africa and for the visibility of African research, etc. So I think, again, events like this, but then also many others where we do raise awareness about these different initiatives are very important also going forward. So that was just from me, knowing that hopefully you will also be helping us with the guidelines for the publishers.
And what Krzysztof mentioned about Poland and their approach, where journals don't charge APCs and they receive support from public institutions, I think it's also a good model to follow.
Well, yes, that's a solution, but it's not without any negative sides, because it makes you very dependent on the fluctuation of public funds. And also we are in a specific position that we are not involved in the whole publication process, but we deliver our service at the end. But generally, yes, the majority of our journals operate in Diamond open access model. They are publicly funded. So they avoid this the whole question of having to charge authors or having to charge for a subscription. I also want to add 2 quick remarks from our experience on what's most necessary for authors, and yeah, I support the conclusion that education is really necessary, because authors really need a lot of support in finding and selecting right journals to publish. They have to have readily available information about their options for example, APC waivers, or for example, for national licensing schemes under which they are entitled to publish without APCs. Some countries provide that, and many authors don't know about it. And also with research data, we have a lot of questions, a lot of concerns from researchers who are not aware about legal issues related to that they should clear, that they have to solve before making data available. They are sometimes afraid of opening data because they are afraid of some kind of misuse after the data is made available. So I think much effort in educating in these directions should be made.
Thank you so much, Krzysztof, Roheena, Raoul, Anna. It was an excellent webinar, and thanks a lot to ASPA and colleagues who supported hosting this webinar. We'll try to finalize a checklist in the coming weeks. So please, perhaps let's agree that we'll keep it open for comments for 2 weeks, and then we'll try to release final document that all open access publishers could use, and we'll try to send answers to unanswered questions, but some of them are really tough, and that was the reason why we couldn't answer them, because we don't really have the answer yet. But let's keep these discussions, like Anna said, and let's try to come up with solutions that work for different countries and different regions. And thank you so much once again, and have a good evening, afternoon, morning, night even, because I see that some colleagues are joining from Asia. Thanks again, and see you at next OSPA webinars. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you very much.